Okay, can you hear me okay? I've been sitting at the back, so I'm going to try and learn all the lessons of how to make ourselves heard. So I'm Gayleen, really honoured to be here and to be asked. Thank you. I've been doing a bit of work with the Catalysing Arts Institute over the years through my role in cultural leadership positions, but now principally as an artist. So thank you so much for having me, and it's great to share the space for this really processing session really from the day. So going from my left to my right, I've got Habda Rashid, who's the Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Fitzwilliam in Cambridge. Mark Miller, we used to know from the Tate, is now independent artist, cultural producer and consultant. And Ian Sargent, who's the Senior Curator of Global Majority Collections at Birmingham Museum Trust. So thank you all. So yeah, this is a bit of a wash-up reflective session. We've been making lots of notes throughout the day. We're going to share some of them, and there'll be a bit of time at the end for some of your own reflection. So let's start with that. Observations. What have you observed today? What's a couple of, maybe two things that have serviced most strongly for you? And maybe, Ian, I'll start with yourself.
Thank you. I started out writing, and I was kind of writing criticality of the artist, but then I changed it and I said the audacity of the artist, because what we've witnessed here and what the artists have kind of spoken about through their time, through their residency, there's an audacity to go into these institutions that have historical issues, deep-seated violence even within that idea of, if we're talking about colonialism and empire, that's embedded within institutions. So to ask artists of colour to go into these institutions and to, address and delve into these archives, these collections, and deal with real traumatic themes and issues, there's an audacity there, there's a braveness there, and the work that comes out of it. I'm always kind of fascinated by how artists then, translate the archive, the word, into an object or an artwork, and how they speak to us in that really rich interdisciplinary way in which they've kind of demonstrated here. And I was excited. I felt like I was in the artist studios, time and time again, where they were kind of talking about their process, talking about their practice, talking about the way in which they engaged with communities, doing this work, doing the work, as it were, that we don't necessarily see or identify or commodify, or so I think that was what really kind of struck me, as well as them being able to kind of contextualize it within deeper research. There was constant reference to Christina Sharp and kind of underlining the work that they were doing. And I think it's just, speaks volumes to the process of the project and the ambition of the project in that regard. So, hats off to Suzanne and the rest of everybody who's involved. And I just have to say, I've really been taken aback by the work that we've seen. And there's an audacity, but what happens after that is a question.
Yeah, I think I was also struck with the how complete. I mean, can we just have a round of applause for the artist, please? Yeah. Just had a strong tingly sense there, because I think there is something about exactly what you were saying, Ian, the audacity of the invitation, but actually how complete the works that were presented here today were. That seems quite an extraordinary achievement, given that you won in each of these spaces doing that. So congratulations. Mark, what struck you from today?
For me, the sort of, if you want resonant, I know you used the term resonant a lot during some of the presentation. I would say is the use of the term risk, I was quite intrigued by both its use and also that it actually came across many of you. I mean, you said risk, you used the term weight, you spoke about pressure, and you also spoke about the kind of personal or project-related missions, and I thought that was quite an interesting pulling together of words, because I understand the risk in the institutional context in terms of, you know, the risk assessments, and then we talk about perhaps the risk of the project and the risk the institution might think about working with artists. But actually, I felt you used it in a broader personal sense in terms of both the risk in those contexts, but also what you could achieve as artists and the weight that you had upon you. So I really thought that was quite important, actually. Just this, if you want, the kind of breadth in which the term risk and weight and pressure and ambition and all those pieces were actually together, you know, which I thought was really important. Another quick one is I got a sense from everyone that the practice within museums had shifted. Even if you think back like 10, even 5 to 6 years, it felt like the organizations you worked with and the related colleagues or leaders within those organizations were really connected to the practices surrounding sort of post-colonial, colonial, raised the collections, what their collections had, how they might have supported you to reach that. I mean, again, I'd say that it's actually props to Decolonizing Arts Institute and, of course, you as artists. But I felt that there wasn't as much. I expected more sort of critique of the organizations, but I got a sense, an authentic sense, that actually the organizations were supportive as much as they can be and as ready as they could be to explore these kind of gaps, erasures, and the potential of you as artists as well.
It's interesting because I think I heard perhaps a little bit more tension, Mark, than you, which might be to do with how my brain is attuned or something. But I think we can come back to that in a second. Thank you. Habda, what about yourself? What struck you from today?
So it's kind of taking what you two have said, but also thinking about how great this project is, and because it did centre the artist. And for me, it was the level of artistic and creative production and connection that I thought is really key for change. I did a project with Glenn Ligon, and we put his work with Wedgwood, and we put his work with Digger. And I saw that in a lot of the projects that you'd have cloth and then a costume, or, you know, botanical drawings, and, you know, or a Hockney I saw in one. And I think the level of kind of artistic and making connection over time, over geographies, places, art making into the narrative of museums. And I think that's really important, and I think that jumps over kind of taxonomy and ideas of kind of separation. And I really delighted in that, and I really delighted in seeing all the kind of, if museums could open their doors, the amount of creativity and new expression, you know, that can come in. And that's, of course, within the context. I was thinking of, just because I was thinking of Glenn, Zora Neale Hurston's quote, you know, I feel most coloured when I'm thrown against a bright white background. And it felt a little bit like everyone was put in these spaces, and it's linked to what you two were saying, and you felt your difference. But within that context, and above that context, the making and the creativity for me stood out. And it was really brilliant to see that, and to think that the ambitions of this residency have, you know, borne the fruit of such brilliant new artworks. The other thing, which was just around the edges, and it's because of my own role in a museum, and so I was the first contemporary curator to come into the FITS, and I felt it in a lot of your presentations, is the friction and the tension around other members of staff. Like, I've had friction from conservators, because that work's not made from ceramic or porcelain or the way a work is recorded and what's omitted and what's written about a work. Registrar, do you know what I mean? So what was also apparent, but perhaps rightly, because you're artists, not spoken about, was the amount of other types of tension or ways of keeping ideas or different works out that exists within the ecology of the museum as well, and that really came through. So, yeah.
Well, let's pick up on that. The next question I've got is called Oddfellows. Artistic versus institutional approaches, because that's kind of what today has been about. We started the day with the galleries, and thank you so much for those representatives too who came and shared. And I think I was really impressed and also intrigued by how the representatives of those museums were grappling themselves with how you create, I think I use a flex space for the ways in which artists need to explore and need space to explore. But I'm curious about those different approaches and what impact they may have on each other. So that what's the intention of the institution when they're bringing an artist in, but what's the intention of the artist when they arrive in that space? And I think we kind of heard lots of different things around that. So for organisations, we heard about the social agenda, we heard about the need to recontextualise their collections, we heard about the managing of risk, right, which is the work, but also the PR risk. We heard about the need to build new audiences. We heard about filling gaps led by, a white workforce, principally what we find in museums. And then we heard about the wake work that the artists do in that. So for you guys, what did you sort of draw from that? The tension that might lie between the different intentions of the artist and the institution? Anyone can jump in and then we'll...
I think someone said it in their presentation, it's really not up to the artists to broaden audiences, and unfortunately, historically, museums have used people of colour or different ways of working for those reasons, and that narrative sadly still exists. However, in my context as being a curator of colour in a very traditional museum, for me, and listening again and seeing what was produced, there are so many beautiful new slippages that do actually then get embedded. For instance, display formats, really boring. But museum puts everything behind cases in glass or with a top on it, or do you know what I mean? So just to come in to nudge, do you know what I mean? And that shifts the intention of museums, and then it shifts the relationship to the object, the way you talk about, the way you write about a work, and that kind of when we did. And again, I think this would have been probably the case in presentations that you made in the museum. When we did Glenn and we put ceramics with his work and manuscripts and prints, they all have their own very serious way they talk about their own subject, and it's all in a certain order. That had to collapse because we had to make it all make sense. And so for me, I don't think they are intentions that a museum thinks about. I don't think, when a museum invites an artist in, I don't think those types of structures, they think, we want to collapse the way we write about manuscripts. But I think they invariably happen. And then, again, like I said, seeing all your work and the different types of work you put in dialogue just makes me think those museums are going to secretly learn a lot from what you're doing and shift practices. They might not overtly talk about it, but it'll happen.
Yes. And I think all of the work we saw would have challenged the presentation of work in a way. Mark, you're an artist and you've been inside the Tate for 18 years. What did you pick up from this tension?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I think for me the tensions were really around, if you want, sort of starting points of the museum, or if you want, the priorities of the museum compared to the priorities or the work or the practice of an artist. And I think the huge tension for me was around the complexity of both, and I think they're very different complexities in terms of the organisation and its priority in terms of holding its collections, right? And that's really why most of these organisations are here. And we all know this. However, there are so many different spaces to manoeuvre for organisations. There's obviously the objects, but then there's also the supporters, the patrons, the audience, each other in terms of the organisation. And I think when an artist or an interpretive cultural worker, whatever it is, approaches the museum, there is a sense of protection, I think, from the museum. And a sense from the artist of their expectations of the museum. So I think sometimes there's a clash, and sometimes there can be a real alignment. So I sense there was this sort of, if you want, a dance, you know, of what do they want, what do I want, what are they going to break, what are they not going to break, you know. And I think for me that's the tension. But I feel that as you've said, as you've all said, like the works felt so complete, you know, and so embedded actually. And I know there's sort of thoughts about kind of what next, but they felt really embedded within the practices of this idea of the collection and the acquisition. However, I felt there was this tensions around the expectation. What do they want me to do? What do I need to be? And then the organizations are obviously really tense, I think. I mean, from my experience working within organizations, because those relationships with artists especially are kind of crucial, you know, to what happens within museums. You know, the reputation of working with artists is absolutely crucial to organizations. So how do you manage that, you know, in the best way, shape or form possible?
Fine.
But you've worked for a museum that has worked with artists, like some museums, including my own, and probably some that people were in, don't like working with artists.
Because why?
Because they want to be completely in charge of how people talk about objects, and artists are protagonists. And that's what I mean about those unseen structures like registrars and conservators. It's like the whole setup is about keeping living people out of that narrative, but giving them the narrative. And so what all this group did is just poke, you know, at like lots of, and that's what I'm saying. There'll be a lot of things I know, because Glen was the first major project that went through the Fitzwilliam, and it created this kind of ruffle, whereas the Tate are used to it. You know, so there will be slippage and slides in the different types of environments that people are working in, but some of them would have hated it.
Ian, you personally are an interesting position. We spoke about, I think it was person from MEMA, I think, this morning spoke about, again, these different time frames that a museum will have. And so, you know, you're now deep in the archive. You're working with some of the old collections that have basically built the museum. I'm curious about your response to this idea about, you know, kind of what happens when we bring artists into a space that's been holding this kind of ancient collection, which people can be very protective of, protective of their identity.
Yeah, I think because Birmingham's like Zach and Sarah have developed a mission for the museum that is reflective, a vision for the museum that is reflective of the city, the super diversity of Birmingham, which I think is rightly so, because I think it was like Billy Dosanjh was talking about this idea of the threshold of, you know, and it made me think of how people are impeded by the threshold, not wanting to go into the institution because they don't see themselves represented, they don't see themselves reflected in the stories, in the objects, in the narratives of the museum. But the mission for Birmingham is to reflect the city, not only through our business plan, but having a citizens' jury that is representative of the citizens of the city. And I think that civic responsibility, I think, is a real key thing. And we've kind of witnessed it in different ways at Birmingham this year, because whilst it's quite a bit of a left field one, but we'd hosted the Ozzy Osbourne exhibition when he was coming back to the city to do his concert, the farewell concert at Villa Park. And it was great. Museum was really busy. There was a kind of a partner exhibition by the business district out in the city centre as well. So, fans of Ozzy would come into the museum. So you had these waves of people. His wife had come to open it up and stuff like that. And then, I remember coming back. I was walking towards the museum one day, a few weeks afterwards, and there was all waves and waves of people. I was thinking, where are these people coming from? What was going on? And then I didn't, I'm not on socials or anything, but then I found out that Ozzy had passed, so all this waves and waves of people would come into the museum. They quickly set up this book of condolence. And it made me think that they really got the idea of what that civic responsibility of what the museum can and should be, really ingraining, embedding that idea of that this is about the people of this city. And I think the continued translation through the work that I'm doing in terms of interrogating the African collection or the global majority collection, the current exhibitions like displays like Elephant in the Room that kind of looks at the colonial collection and what it means, and some of the problematics of the collection in that way, and asking questions, asking the visitors to the museum to look at it in different ways. And you're constantly getting people coming out of the space to kind of talk about their experience, and you get comments. There are comments, some of them not so great, some of them are really positive. But you need to get that conversation going, because so you got all of these different kinds of audiences. But I also think about the idea then that how do you do that work whilst retaining and maintaining your traditional visitors to the museum while all of this is happening, but against a backdrop of bankruptcy and all those kind of things that so you have to kind of contend with all of these tensions. And so I think by perhaps going to the question even, I think by bringing artists into the space to disrupt, interrupt, and poke and prod and interrogate collections and look at them through a contemporary lens is so important for museums, because it isn't about that, the kind of stillness, that fixed notion of history that we're looking at. We're looking at things that continue to resonate if we're looking at the backdrop in which the work is happening right now.
Yeah, I think it's... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say just a thing around the conversations about institutions, and I think it's really good to think. I like the term of kind of artists interrupting museums, because I'm still going in my mind this idea of the pressure that you might, if you're tasked to go into an organisation to interrogate, I think the interruption's a really good term, but also that these organisations are individuals, and I say that coming from sort of working at one of the biggest ones in this country, and it always feels quite hard when you hear Tate. You hear Tate rather than, and I know Tate is Tate, but it's always great to break down those organisations. I think it's, as you said before, there's kind of people within the organisation who love it, and there are people in the organisation who think, oh my God, you're going to change how we work. So it's quite, I think, powerful to break down institutions.
And even amongst us, I mean, I don't know how many people of colour were working in the museums that you were in, but like, you're lucky in Birmingham,
True.
and you're in a centre
Yeah.
in London, but in Cambridge, you know, there's me and one other person, you know,
Yeah.
and if you haven't got those people in the organisation, then there are going to be gaps and silences, you know, and so that's the flip side to the equation, isn't it?
Yes.
Really, and it's the silence is real, the gap is real, because that information isn't there, because the people haven't been there to
Yeah.
put that information in there. So that's the flip side to everything we're talking about today, isn't it?
I mean, Charisse, your work speaks to that quite directly, doesn't it? You said this idea when these museums are, you know, silent, they're the repositories of silence in a way, of reverence, and the reverence of all these objects which have been carefully preserved and presented to you. And who is that silence for? And I think all of your work today that was presented today made a different kind of noise in that space. But to do that alone as the only one, when I was working places like the British Film Institute and spaces like that, I was always the only one. And there is something a very specific type of weight, pressure, all of the things that were described today, when you are the only one. And I think, Billy, we need your line on a T-shirt, which is like, I came and had a look. I mean, that's enough. Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes if there's just one of you, it's enough that you've gone and had a look into a space that no one's ever been able to look before. So I think, again, props to all of you who went and had a look, let alone produced incredible work. So, complicity. Let's go here. Let's get in. Let's get into it. How complicit are we? How complicit are we? I'm going to be not even devil's advocate. It's just a real question. How complicit are we engaging with institutions that have a history of colonial violence and exclusion, and then we go in saying, "I will help you, you know, change or remake." What's the line between complicity and change making? And how do we feel that? I'm looking at you, Habda.
I was deeply thinking about that, actually. So what's complicity or change making, and what's the line between? I think, you know, everything on the table, the Fitzwilliam is funded directly from transatlantic slave money. So if I count Fitzwilliam's maternal grandfather was director of South Seas and India. And he was also the person who took the taxes off plantation goods when he became an MP here. And he was also one of the MPs that... so, you know, that thing where if something is about to go bankrupt of national interest, they hook it to the national finances. He did that for the South Seas company. So he set up that whole system. So our collection is deeply the money for the Fitzwilliam, and the founding collection is directly in relationship to... so we have... But we're part of the University of Cambridge. So for the past 4 years, the university, and is continuing, so hopefully we'll get to a point where we'll make a centre to re-look at the whole collection and to be honest about where money comes from. So that's going on, and that will continue to go on in general. And then in terms of the collection, I mean, you slip again, you move forward, and then you move backwards. I mean, we live in a culture of that, you know. You make these great strides, you know, with Glenn Ligon's show. The collection, when I inherited it, the painting collection didn't have... This was 2022, no works by non-white artists at all, you know. And so the collection is changing, but... So I don't think... There is not to push back and to provoke. I don't think there's anything to be complicit with any longer.
Interesting.
Do you know what I mean? I think these places are rootedless these days. You know, I think there's a holding on and a gripping on to tradition. And I feel that my own sense and through my work is there's a grappling to make sense of their own past and its own past now. Yeah. And I think the world's taken over a little bit, and it's, you know, what we'll come on to. But all I can say is through the work that we've done, it's made a difference.
Great, thank you. Same question both of us, and if you can, because we're about 10 past 5, so I want to just make, and we've got a big punch question at the end. So if you could kind of make it a little concise. So this idea of complexity versus change making, how do you feel in that line? Sorry.
I think similar to Abba, I feel like we've done many projects within the institution that have made a difference. I think complicity is less the term, I would say, perhaps failure is more appropriate, in a sense of like how much change I thought would happen wasn't able to happen, even though change happened. I'm very proud of that work. However, I've had many moments where I've thought, God, this was the strategy, this was the aims, but we only did 20% of it or 30% of it, or the real crucial embedded parts of it haven't stayed, or, you know, so I think that side of stuff perhaps.
Thank you. Ian?
Yeah, the complicity is if we don't do the work and actually ask the questions and ask the really difficult questions of ourselves, why we're actually there, what we're actually there to do. You know, I'm on a fixed term contract. My time is limited in terms of doing that work. So, you know, if I don't make those real inroads into the collection, then what happens afterwards? How does the work that I do in the time that I have get embedded? You know, what happens? Who picks up that work and moves it on? So there is a sense of complicity in picking up the baton in the first place, because it's one of those things where you know that it's fixed term. So, you know, I went in there with my eyes open, knowing full well that this thing is... But I felt that it's important work to be done, because the work needs to be understood in a new way, in a different way perhaps. The difficult language of the collection needs to be understood and brought to the fore and questioned. And the process in itself needs to be viewed through this contemporary way.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. So the big drum roll question is on that. From black squares to white flags. In the timeline of 2020 project, we have literally gone from institutions black squaring it through to the display of a St. George flag around the country. Someone spoke about the difference, I think it was Angeli actually, how it feels now travelling across the country feels very different than it did 5 years ago. There's much more tension in the air. The political shift has been drastic. So what do we mean by doing the work now? You know, does the language of decolonisation still have power? What does it look like for the future? Hit it, Ian.
I bet I get it wrong. Is it... I needed to share this work. Does everybody know this work? Yeah. And instantly, when you first mentioned this, because I think this was made by Eddie Chambers as a 20-year-old student at Bilston College. And for me, this is doing the work. This is confronting, because he talks about this idea of, you know, that the Wolverhampton was festooned with the NF stickers, and he talks about that. But then when I look at this work, the thing that concerned me about this work was that how would people respond to it if this work was shown in this time of flags and would people appreciate what this work says, what Eddie's trying to say through this work? And would they understand the conceptual intention of this work? And so I really wanted to share it with people, and, as a provocation, but how it made me feel, seeing that work then, thinking about him as a student, and, it's like 20-year-old, like coming up with something as powerful as this. It's like, and then Tate purchased it, 2013 or something like that, I think Tate bought the work. So, yeah.
But also it speaks to the cyclicality, that isn't a word,
Yeah.
but it should be 40 years ago, and the image of the flag has yet again become. Mark, for yourself, how are you feeling now?
I was going to say
about the
that
question?
cyclicality, I think, is I was going to tap into as well. I think I'm old enough to remember the movement from multiculturalism, diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of that. And I think when in my younger years I thought multiculturalism was going to be the space, but we moved to somewhere quite different in terms of the identity politics, or the politics of identity became, I feel, quite dividing in many ways. And I think this is the moment to think about the cyclicality of all of this, even like this period which I lived through, which this is so resonant, is that, okay, what's our response now? And I think our response now, for me, is that if I was going to speak to any 25-year-old, is to think about setting up your own organization, your own movements that are thinking much more in the plural, in the collective, in the community. And I know it sounds really kind of obvious, but I think there is something about, like, how do we bring ourselves back together,
Yeah.
Both, I think, intellectually, physically, spiritually and artistically. I think it's really important that we try and pull ourselves back, and I know we all hold different spaces. I think this idea of intersectionality, and probably don't even want to use that term in many ways, but the idea that, all of us from diverse backgrounds, whatever our upbringings, lived experience, this is a moment for us to come back. And we did do so, perhaps in the 70s and some of the 80s, and I think we should always remember that, as you say, it's cyclical and we can bring it back.
And then, sorry, just to develop what you're saying further, and again, this is particular to my work, what we are as well seeing is centres shifting in the arts, implosion particularly of Germany, America, and the growth of countries in Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, India. So what is really brilliant and exciting is this kind of global connection and confidence in that global connection that's happening. Last year I went to Ghana with Julian Knox, Andrew Pierre, do you know what I mean? And it was a really nice exchange and confidence in, positions and connections and growth. And I think that's going to get more important, and the significance of Western centres reduced. But we also are hitting a moment of real funding crisis in the arts. And in Cambridge, which is unheard of, we've just had not legislation, but voting going through to stop student protests. And that's, I think, linked to funders. And so we are going to hit a really terrible moment for institutions, and we're seeing it already, of massive funding crisis and then shifts in structures within organisations linked to where funding can come from. And that's a really scary moment. But the most brilliant moment in our lifetime is to see the confidence in being Pakistani and connecting with Pakistani artists, or Indian, or Caribbean, you know, from Trinidad or wherever, and that confidence wasn't there before. You know, and I think that's the exciting shift.
Global South.
Thank you. All right, we have got 5 minutes for, we can do that. This isn't a question, this is a comment moment. You can make comments. So any reflections on the day, on anything that you've picked up that we haven't? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for that really stimulating conversation. I just wanted to say that as a 2020 artist and working with the museum, that, you know, to me, the way going forward is that curators need to change their way of operating. You know, when you think of a force 90% white, they haven't even been taught the history, so they don't know it, you know. So it's really important now that they look at how they give up that power, you know, and really pay attention to their stakeholders, invite their communities in, and part of that community is the artists. This is a time of reckoning, and it's time to tell the truth about these objects that are in their collections. And for me, that is a really important way for us to go forward. You know, curators have to think very differently now, and not about themselves.
And directors, not just curators.
So behind you.
Can I respond to
let's,
that? All right, yeah.
I'd just like to make an observation about your comment about Ozzy Osbourne and the timeliness of his the timeliness of his death and that activating. Yeah, there's something about Eddie Chambers' work that has a kind of direct action about it. You know, they were making work in a circumstance which compelled him to make a statement that had such direct action. So I would say, yes, show it. And I am interested in this kind of cyclical idea that actually political ideas are being returned to. So is there a role for kind of exhibition histories? This idea of representing the past in these exhibition forms as well as artworks, anchoring them with the new artist's work, etc. This a way of reappraising those historical periods of time and how artists respond to it. Again, it's this framing of the circumstances by which artists make work in this social framework that I'm really interested in. It's social historical framework, which I think is a kind of powerful context to move forward. Yeah.
Can I?
2 seconds, I really want to hear.
Okay, go.
But I was just going to say, Ian was curator of the Black Art Group exhibition.
Yeah, so I was going to come
Wolverhampton, which was. You could have said that yourself.
I could, but say it.
Go on then, say it.
I'm not going to say it. No,
Sorry.
Go to
I just wanted to respond to what you just said, because there is this sense that with a lot of shows that we've seen maybe in the last couple of years of this revisiting of past shows, past histories, but there's also a danger that people are rewriting those histories. And there's this kind of line that's being crossed where if it's not the history that wants to be remembered, sometimes it's slightly altered and tweaked, and that completely changes the meaning. So I think there's a sense of, yes, we should be looking to some of these incredible shows that came from the past, but also thinking, what are the changes we want to make now, and what does that then look like in 20, 30 years' time?
Wow.
Thank you all. I just wanted to speak maybe about, or just put to you, what are the ways in which maybe, because one thing I've noticed in terms of the conversation is maybe because of things like reputation, an institution or people representing institutions can't maybe speak about the risk or be vulnerable about what some of the actual true vulnerability, I think, in terms of the things that they're dealing with, in terms of maybe, okay, so yes, the funders that they're dealing with, or there's I think artists are willing to talk about the pressures and willing to talk about the risks that we're willing to take. And we have reputational damage to do that, right? Because, you know, people might not want to work with you if you're raising hell or whatever. And I know that, I was just wondering what the spaces are for truth in that sort of way, especially when it's everyone's job. I think, you know, at the end of the day, it's their jobs, and so it's their livelihoods, and there is risk if they say something about the institution that they're working for sometimes. So I'm just intrigued at, like, what can really actually be said by somebody representing an institution or feeling like they are.
And I was going to say, I think it's kind of truth on both sides, right? Because some of it is true. Some artists are difficult to work with. Some artists have too higher expectations of what institutions can actually do. And I think to Abda's point, I think there's also, like, there are some people within organizations who just don't want to change what they do, which you get with most jobs, right? I think in confidence, people can say as much as they probably want if they do trust someone. I don't think there's a big sort of shroud of secrecy. I used to think that. I used to think, oh my God, you know, what are these board meetings? What's happening in them? There isn't that much that you don't already understand. And I think that's sometimes part of the challenge, that actually you think this huge thing's happening, but actually it's basic stuff. You know, it's as you said, I mean, it's someone's job, right? Even on that level, they might not want to lose it. Do they trust you enough to say, you know what, oh God, I just don't agree with what that director says? Because you know what it's like, things go out. You know, so I think on many levels they're quite simple things, and there isn't a massive sort of secrecy piece going on. But I do feel that there is trust that needs to be built, and sometimes the alignment with artists, external, internals, sometimes it's just magical and it all just happens and it's absolutely amazing. So we also got to remember that as well, you know, and I think the scale of the interpersonal piece is sometimes underestimated, the relational bit.
But can I just come back to you, Sharice? I think, Sharice, you're asking something. I'm hearing something else.
I'm not really speaking about the artist in relationship to it. I'm really speaking more about the kind of direction and the kind of. So it's really great that you're here and some of the representatives are here as well. And I was just thinking about the ways in which you can't, not speaking about what's happening between artists and other artists was difficult to work with, but it's actually like, you know, we're in a white lash, a fascist uprising in our country, and actually, like, there are a lot of pressures that institutions are facing, such as bankruptcy and things like that, right? And it's just like, they can't really even, you know, they're not going into that so much, and because of the fears of the, like, right-wing media and things like that. And, you know, it's really wonderful to see you say that, you know, what to even just say, showing that Eddie Chambers' work is a question mark, and it'll be a question mark for some institutions. It's like, can we even, you know, can we even show something like that?
Can I ask you, Sharice, there was a question, and if you don't mind, just because I'm looking at time and I'm conscious of have to wrap up, but there was a question that I was going to ask you artists before, so I'd like to ask this back to you, Sharice, and then over drinks we will give you the skinny.
It's Shanice.
The question I was going to ask you is, if you were to do this again, if you were to do 2020 again, what would you want the institution to tell you before you start? What's the information you want to know for you to go, okay, now I know where you know where I'm coming from, now I know where you guys are coming from. What would you want them to tell you?
I guess different institutions, different, but for me, like you're saying, everybody has a different kind of operating system, right? And it was really one of the cultures of silence that I was trying to get into is like, why is nobody telling me exactly what can happen? Yes. And who will allow it to happen? Yes. When and who's stopping something from happening?
Because it's almost like Wizard of Oz. There's no one.
No one knows.
There is no one behind the curtain.
That is really serious truth.
And it's the ridiculousness of it.
It goes back to what you were saying, that you know, your question, Karen, or your argument about curators opening up, because actually all the knowledge resides outside the institution. It's in the communities. that's where the knowledge resides, from different lived experiences and research and activism, getting up and doing the work themselves.
And please believe me, Ian's on a fixed-term contract. I was initially. Most of my black and brown colleagues are on fixed-term, precarious, part-time contracts. They can't speak up.
Yeah.
They can't.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I wish it was different, but it's the reality.
I also felt with the workers, like people, they're new to the institution, so you can't represent something that you've been in 2 years. These things happened before people arrived and things like that.
Yeah.
But then who
knows?
how can the work be done if no one can be responsible in
Yeah.
some way? I was just...
But at the end of the day, the museum stuff, I mean, that has to be diversified.
Yeah.
That is in the long term.
What I'm going to, we really can't take more, but
We're getting this side.
But I'd like to feed this out. I think it's a really good place to end, Cherise, because I think it's really... Shanice, sorry. There's no more questions, I'm sorry. Do you want another question? I'm looking at Susan.
I could have just
We're
got up.
5 minutes over.
Sorry, Galen, have we got to wrap up now? Is that what you said?
Go on, you've got it.
Well, all right, yeah. Like, just that Eddie Chambers thing makes me think of Tam Joseph's thing, Spirit of the Carnival. It's that same sense of sort of protest there, at the same sort of epoch as well, I just want to go back to something we were saying a little while ago, like how the world has changed in the last 5 years. I think this sort of authoritarianism that we're living in, it sort of makes Orwell kind of prophetic a little bit. And, we've got this sort of hard right, centre ground thing going on. And for a couple of seasons, there was this flame that burned, and it was around those... There was a couple of seasons where it was burning, And I remember I got a bit giddy on the fumes, because I was like, change is here. And a lot of my more seasoned pals were like, nah, mate, you just got a couple of windows and then it's going to be back to as it was. Yeah. And actually, interesting, that elastic band's gone back even further than where it was. And this sort of like push and pull. I just think like, I think it's troubling times, and I think really challenging times for artistic expression. And it's not a sort of, it's just an observation, but I think, I really feel that. And I think coming out at the end of this residency, I should have foreseen it. We had Liz Truss, Cameron, we had all those bellends, Daily Mail, Russia. Do you know what I mean? Like, all of Europe was going right. I just didn't think we would do the same. But we did Brexit. So actually the genie's out of the box. And here we are now dealing with the sort of outcome of that. It's tough to know how to sort of band together. And I think when I started the residency, I thought us 20 artists are going to be on this sort of transformational journey where we're going to be bonded, the museums, and we can sort of have a say in this. But actually... I hope we can have that chat, but it is sort of, we're in crisis mode, I think, across everywhere in the arts.
I think there's also a really, actually weirdly I'm going back to Sheffield tomorrow, so I'll look at your work. I think there's a massive disconnect between our public institutions and poverty and class, and I think the distance is getting bigger, you know what I mean? And I do think, this is centering race, but I think class and race intersect, and that does concern me quite a bit because everyone's ticketed now, which although you might think collections are free, it's still prohibitive, as in like you think, why am I going to go? You know what I mean? I don't really understand a collection, and that does really concern me.
Yeah, and I think that vector of like systems of disbelief, we learnt about that a few months ago around white fragility, like disbelief that we have to do the work, that there's this history to contend with, to find the time to do that, to dedicate yourself. Like that slowly got starker now. People who weren't doing the work before aren't going to be feeling the conviction now to do it, it's gone the other way. So it's really interesting. I feel like what we're doing now is more of like, has a funereal atmosphere, like a moratorium, rather than a celebration at the end of this. Things are pivoted, and I don't mean to say that with no joy. There's no joy in me saying that, but it's a feeling that I have.
I mean, I think that's because of it would be strange for it to feel vastly different than that, given the world that's happening outside of this room. So we will have to split, but there's drinks, there's food, there's more conversation. I would like to, as maybe offer as a last provocation, I think there's a really important point that was made here when we've heard a lot about the artist's vulnerability, and we've heard also about the need for the institution to be more vulnerable. And I think that's what I'm hearing in your request, which is given the fact that we're in such a moment of flux, how does the institution learn how to be more honest, especially if they're bringing artists in and asking them to do the same? So that's a kind of final thought, I think, provocation for myself. But I want to just thank all of you, particularly the institutions and most definitely the artists who have really done the work. So a round of applause for them.
Gone over your time, sorry. Click.
I do want to come back to this image. Yes, we've come to the end of a long but wonderful day, and I want to acknowledge the emotion, the weight, the pressure, the trauma. I would say there is joy, there has been joy, there is joy, there will be joy. If there is also, undeniably exhaustion. But, revisiting Eddie's work and other works, Tam Joseph, thank you for reminding us. Let's keep reminding ourselves of the work that keeps us fired up, because exhausted though we might be, the conviction is there. On the point about it taking 20 years for Tate to acquire this work, between the 20-year-old Eddie making it and the institution to purchase it, I'm reminded of the fact that there are many, many stories similar to this. This pattern is a pattern. Most recently, I was looking at Vong Palpanit's Neon Ricefield, which was shortlisted for the Turner, which was made in 1993, and that took 20 years. It took Tate 20 years to acquire that work too. And I'm wondering if there's something about the, at the time, hot potato, polemical for a host of reasons. Is it something about waiting for it to become more of a historical, social artifact that can be talked about, framed in safer terms? And how exciting when it's actually, it's in the collection now, you have to show it, you should show it. It's polemical. It was never not polemical. But I think there's a real opportunity in the fact that, we have these 20 incredible permanent new collection acquisitions made by artists now, speaking to the now, from the now, and to the future. There's an incredible opportunity here to galvanize, activate that work, to generate those new knowledges. And I don't mean new knowledges in the ref framework kind of way. I'm talking about the knowledges, the perspectives, the worldviews, the experiences that are missing, that are not reflected back to us enough when we walk in through the doors and decide we're going to take a look. I wasn't planning to say very much because I'm very aware of time and that we've gone slightly over. There's no way I can distill any further or extend any further the beautiful thoughts synthesized by and opened up by our plenary panel. So thank you so much for the pushing those reflections. I will take just 1 minute to wrap up. It really just remains for me to thank again all our speakers and moderators throughout the day for your incredibly honest and rich reflections, provocations. Keep them coming, please. Don't let these conversations end here. And there's no end to the thanks that we need to extend to the artists and the collection partners who have been supportive, who have held those spaces for the artists and who have opened themselves up to the possibilities of risk and vulnerability. So thank you again. Another round of applause, please, for our artists and collection partners. Thanks also to all our supporters and collaborators and enablers over the last few years, with whom we hope to continue to do this learning and unlearning, this building and unbuilding, in whatever way we can manage. A small shout out to the upcoming series in development, still doing the work. Angelique's waving the Doing the Work book at the back there. We're developing another series with CAS, Contemporary Art Society, so look out for that. So for now, what else do I need to say? Thank you to the audience. Thank you for staying with us all day. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it gives me great pleasure to invite you all to join us for a drink upstairs. There's time to spend time with the work in all its wonderful manifestations, to commune with the artists, to be convivial, and to continue the conversations. Thank you. I'm sorry, I think we have, thank you, Charu, but I'm afraid we're going to have to take the chat out to the reception now. We have to... Thank you, Charu. Everyone, thank you again, and please grab some refreshments upstairs. Thank you.